Morning, everyone. I'm just going to mute Jordan as he's getting his cup of coffee, I believe. And I am just getting up going here. Okay, so we are launched. Jordan, I muted you because we were getting too many kitchen sounds from you. So Debbie and I just evolved the new idea for Confluence 23. And our new idea, because there was a little bit of concern about using the term feminine in the title, is Jung, Art, and Psychology Evolving Toward Wholeness Together.
That works.
Yeah, that works. I had suggested to her this morning evolving from either or to both and she said, "Oh, that's too complicated." Blah blah blah. she always.
That's my favorite thing.
I know that's your favorite thing.
Wholeness works because that's the same thing as both and. I just use that as a teaching to get people out of either or.
Yeah, and we don't have, and by using wholeness, we don't have to criticize either or. Right. So
well, I still will criticize either or because people often don't know the either or piece says you have to make a decision, and that's true, but sometimes making a decision is to not do anything. And so I think the both and goes back and forth together with them all the time, but it's again also professional jargon in a way that becomes, like Debbie said, it's too complex.
Yeah. And it just forces everybody to say, okay, what is this all about? And we got Jung in the name, which was desirable and desired by the let's say the sponsoring group of this event this year. Okay, so we are up to paragraph 916. This is going to be interesting, I think, because I don't think a lot of people think about this before. And so I'll take the first one.
Okay.
Okay, forerunners of the idea of synchronicity. The paragraph 916, and we're reading from paragraph 916 in volume 8 of the collected works of C.G. Jung, and it is also 916, I presume, in the standalone book on synchronicity that's available on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
And so here we go. The causality principle asserts that the connection between cause and effect is a necessary one. The synchronicity principle asserts that the terms of a meaningful coincidence are connected by simultaneity and meaning. So if we assume that the ESP experiments and numerous other observations are established facts, we must conclude that besides the connection between cause and effect, there is another factor in nature which expresses itself in the arrangement of events and appears to us as meaningful, as meaning. Although meaning is an anthropomorphic interpretation, it nevertheless forms the indispensable criterion for synchronicity. What that factor which appears to us as meaning may be in itself, we have no possibility of knowing. As an hypothesis, however, it is not quite as so impossible as may appear at first sight. We must remember that the rationalistic attitude of the West is not the only possible one, and it is not all embracing, but is in many ways a prejudice and a bias that ought perhaps to be corrected. The very much older civilization of the Chinese has always thought differently from us in this respect, and we have to go back to Heraclitus if we want to find something similar in our civilization, at least where philosophy is concerned. Only in astrology, alchemy, and the mantic procedures do we find no differences of principle between our attitude and the Chinese. That is why alchemy developed along parallel lines in East and West, and why in both spheres it strove toward the same it strove toward the same goal with more or less identical ideas. And there's a footnote, Psychology and Alchemy, paragraph 453, and The Spirit of Mercurius, paragraph 273. Also, the doctrine of Chen Yin in Wei Po Yang's The Philosophical Tree, and in Mysterium, paragraphs 490 and 711, a note, and in Chung Tzu. Okay, that's a complex footnote.
I think you
Comments?
already preambled it with the either or, both and, because the Western rationalistic is the either or,
Yeah,
and the mantic procedures, which refers to divination or prophecy
yeah,
type situations, either or of those, is the more both and, which is more the wholeness principle that you guys arrived on. And I
right.
think that Heraclitus had such a wholeness because, I mean, he traveled, and that's the thing. The best cure for racism is travel, because when in Rome, and then you realize, oh, these people think nothing like I do, but they have similar values. And so you just go about the quote unquote mantic procedure of life. In a sense, life itself is divination. When I walking down the street and I look up in a tree and I see Mary Cassatt's face, or Einstein, or that's a mantic procedure. It's a visual language, and that's the thing about, I think, divination and prophecy. It's not really so much fortune telling or future telling. What it is telling of all without time, and the things that are alive and capital in nature. That's the biggest mantic procedure that we all then live in. So I think his distinction between the Western and rationalistic, which is either or, you must prove it, you must make a decision, you must explain it. And I find that to be childish, because it's still appealing to some parent, as it were, to get approval. Whereas the wholeness principles, and typically in Eastern and the other type of mantic procedures, the wholeness is, I'm unthreatened. This is what I say. This is what I see. This is what I do. And I'm not asking for permission. So it's childlike, because it's wise and connected rather than childish, which is appealing for some kind of approval.
Right. And Jung said a couple of times about prophecy that it's not seeing the future from the get-go. It is actually looking at history and predicting based on history. So last week I was in a fifth grade, and the students wanted me to predict who was going to win in the games of the U.S. versus Iran and Argentina versus Poland. And so I correctly predicted it. Right. It wasn't hard. And I basically also, I didn't do this with the fifth grade, but I also predicted yesterday's result vis-a-vis Netherlands. And, what's clear in the pairings of the World Cup is the organizers of the World Cup are going to make you earn the World Cup and be the best team. And so they're putting the best against the best, and then the best against the weakest to knock the weakest out. And either way, you get to who's the best team.
Well, yeah, and I think I appreciate your point about Jung saying that the fortune telling is really prediction based on history. And I appreciate the concept, but to me, it's also rather vague in general. Not the way you said it, but the way he's applying it, because it really is limited by if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. If you do know history, you can inform your intuition and not repeat it, or repeat it better. And the thing about it, I think conceptually, if I look at it three-dimensionally in a diagram, future telling or fortune telling about the future relative to the past like that is taking the past and making the mirror only, or making the present only a mirror that then repeats but backwards across the axis. And so what happens then is that becomes philosophically a bit devoid of life. And that then, of course, then that's covered by predeterminism and those philosophies.
Right.
When we know that to a great degree, yes, that occurs, but to an extent only. And so things do evolve, sometimes quickly, sometimes long, over long periods of time. But I think that's putting a mirror in the present as a substitute for the present tense, so that the past reflects over the axis forward. And it's a good 101 learning notion. But as you know, I mean, if you're in a firefight, that's not how it works. I mean, the present is no mirror. This particular day, this time has never happened before.
Yep. Right. And there's always the unexpected.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. There's always a crack in that mirror, you know.
Yeah. Right. Okay, you're up. 917.
In Chinese philosophy, one of the oldest and most central ideas is that of Tao, which the Jesuits translated as God. But that is correct only for the Western way of thinking. Other translations, such as providence and the like, are mere makeshifts. Richard Wilhelm brilliantly interprets it as meaning. And he does that in The Way and the Power. The concepts of the Tao pervades the whole philosophical thought of China. Causality occupies this paramount position with us, but it acquired its importance only in the course of the last 2 centuries. Thanks to the leveling influence of the statistical method on the one hand, and the unparalleled success of the natural sciences on the other, which brought the metaphysical view of the world into disrepute. Lao Tzu, go ahead.
Yeah. All right, go ahead. You want to read that? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think this applies. Lao Tzu gives the following description of Tao in his celebrated Tao Te Ching. There is something formless yet complete that existed before heaven and earth. How still, how empty, dependent on nothing, unchanging, all-pervading, unfailing. One may think of it as the mother of all things under heaven. I do not know its name, but I call it meaning. If I had to give it a name, I should call it the Great, from chapter 25 of the Tao Te Ching.
Right. Yeah, I think I think this is where we're now going back into this, right? Because the essence of the Tao is that within all of our cacophony of our talking heads and every other thing under the sun, there is the answer. The answer exists, okay? And one thing about living with my wife is that she's quite brilliant, and I will make a partial statement about something, anything, and she will always give me the answer. And so today I had made this suggestion that we use evolving from either or to both and she immediately says, "Oh, no, that's too complicated. How about evolving toward wholeness together?" and boy, she nailed it. And so that's that's also wisdom in a sense. I mean,
it is, and I appreciate the wholeness piece, because that's then what it is. But then I back off of wholeness as a teaching tool because it's vague. Because people go, well, but what do you mean? And then you have to remove the shame, or enhance the guilt, or temper the guilt, or make responsibility, or. But with the both and, I can play the example of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers without the music on, and you'll notice that he's being dragged behind her ski boat most of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, even when he's leading, he's being dragged leading behind her ski boat. And the thing is, she's doing everything he's doing except backwards and in heels.
Yep.
And the thing about that with the both and actually then the wholeness of them both as dance is then important. And I think you can get it, but you have to understand that there's more than one thing contributing to the wholeness. And wholeness implies obviously unity. And then the unity statement cancels out that there are any constituents.
Precisely.
Because the wholeness is interdependent. So I find that, wholeness is easy to teach from, because if you dial into interdependence, then there you are. But I usually drop back to both and to try to move people into wholeness in the concept, at least.
Well, to help people see that there is a red line of the Tao that goes
right
down through the centuries with all of us. And, it's taken us thousands of years to evolve to this point. And now we get through 500 years of the scientific method and realize that it's not everything. And a lot of things can't be explained clearly by cause and effect. And you could get down to the Higgs boson and you're still not sure that you're down there.
Well, right.
Build a $1 billion particle collider to prove that even the Higgs boson exists.
Well, exactly. And again, that's then the Western, does it exist? Is it important that we know that it does or doesn't? And I think back to wholeness, it's like the void. It's like the emptiness. It's like the synapse, where if Nietzsche, if you gaze long enough into the void, it gazes back. Well, that attributes then a personality to the nothingness, which I think is important, because I remember a professor used to always just hammer that quote in. And
what was the quote? I'm sorry, I accidentally pulled
from Nietzsche. Yeah, Nietzsche. If you gaze long enough into the abyss gazes back.
Yeah. Okay.
And, that attributes personality to the nothingness. But every time there was a philosophy professor in college, and she knew it pissed me off when she said that, because there was something there. And I'm just like, oh gosh, stop the broken record. I get it. You're attributing personality to nothingness. But one day she starts going in, and I feel the hair on the back of my neck just, iring up. But I feel it, and I notice that wholeness, and I stop. And so when she finishes, I went, yes, except, if you gaze long enough into the abyss will gaze back. But if you gaze too long into the abyss will tell you it's rude to stare. So
wow.
She never said
Jordan,
it again.
I lost about a minute and a half of what you just said because I accidentally dropped my book and it yanked my headset off. So I didn't hear a darn thing until I put my headset back in, and you were saying once again, if you look into the abyss stares back. Those were the exact words you were using. So there's a synchronicity. I guess we can move on.
Well, the last part of that, just so you hear it, is, I mean, it is a synchronicity, and at the same time, it was that professor knew it pissed me off every time she said it because it was like a broken record, and so she just, she'd poke, it. But one day, I caught the fact that the hair on my neck rose, fired up, and so I just calmly, honestly, wholeness, that happened, and I listened deeply. Except I listened, trying not to laugh, because when she finished, I said, and this is the part you missed, the synchronicity that I added to, was if you gaze long enough into the abyss, yes, the abyss will gaze back. But if you gaze too long into the abyss will lean forward and tell you it's rude to stare.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So anyway.
I think we've gotten the point across.
Yeah.
So moving on.
Stop kicking it.
Yeah, paragraph 919. Everybody knows how Jordan feels about this, right?
Yes.
I'm with you, Jordan. It's part of the Tao, right? 919. Tao covers.
That's the most elegant way to say you're full of BS.
No. I'm saying you've got a point on the Tao. Let's move on. So, paragraph 919. Tao covers the 10,000 things like a garment, but does not claim to be a master over them. That's from chapter 34 of the Tao Te Ching. Lao Tzu describes it as nothing. And the footnote is Tao is the contingent, which Andreas Spicer defines as pure nothing. Well, it's definitely more than pure nothing, I think. It's something. By which he means, says Wilhelm, only its contrast with the world of reality. Lao Tzu describes its nature as follows. We put 30 spokes together and call it a wheel, but it is on the space where there is nothing that the utility of the wheel depends. We turn clay to make a vessel, but it is on the space where there is nothing that the utility of the vessel depends. We pierce doors and windows to make a house, and it is on these spaces where there is nothing that the utility of the house depends. Therefore, just as we take advantage of what is, we should recognize the utility of what is not. Chapter 11 of the Tao Te Ching. Want to go on?
Well, real quickly, I think what's the pure nothing Andreas Spicer defines the Tao as to be the contingent. To me, the pure nothing is quite a thing, except what's interesting is that quite a thing, make up a new word, a capital T-H-I-N-G. So instead of the nothing being a thing, the nothing is an a thing, like a not thing. Yeah. And I think what's interesting there is then with the pierce doors and windows to make a house, I once made a joke that said, I want a house with no doors and no windows. It'll be the most solid house you've ever seen. And then I stopped and went, but you can't get in and you can't get out. So it's like,
right. Okay, so you go ahead.
You go ahead. It was a bunker. So, right. But even that has its holes. So 920, nothing is evidently meaning or purpose, and it is only called capital N nothing because it does not appear in the world of the senses, but is only its organizer. And that's from Wilhelm and the Chinese Lebensweisheit. The relation between meaning and reality cannot be conceived under the category of cause and effect. And he goes on to say, Lao Tzu says, because the eyes gaze but can catch no glimpse of it, it is called elusive. Because the ear listens but cannot hear it, it is called the rarefied. Because the hand feels for it but cannot find it, it is called the infinitesimal. These are called the shapeless shapes, forms without form, vague semblances. Go towards them, and you can see no front. Go after them, and you can see no rear. From chapter 14.
Right. Okay.
Well, actually, quickly there, I think what's interesting is that text there, because the eye gazes and can catch no glimpse of it, it's called elusive. But especially because the hand feels for it but cannot find it, it is called infinitesimal. It reminds me of a martial arts discipline that we used to do called literally catching fire. And you would literally reach to try to catch the flame, reach to try to catch the flame. No matter what you did, it's not there when you reach it. And if you stay too long, you get burned. And if you go too short, you don't even get close. So no front, no rear. But what was interesting is you could see it, except it was a lesson in the defensive tactic of evasion, of just simply don't block, just don't get hit, be the fire. So in meditating to catch the fire, you ended up viscerally, physically learning how to flow like water in a way that you couldn't learn by working with water, because you could actually feel the water. Now the fire has warmth and heat, but there's no graspable. My hand may be warm, but I don't feel that as a thing. It's just an affect. But if I went to grab water, and my hand would be wet, and oh, look, it's glistening, and I can see and feel and hold, oh, that's 10 grams of water on my surface, my skin. But the catching fire piece was because the hand feels it but cannot find it. It is called the infinitesimal. And it took you to that infinitesimal, to that, numinous experience physically. And it was just such an interesting exercise and discipline, because you couldn't catch the fire, and you knew you couldn't, but you didn't stop trying. And it was an integration of that wholeness of, I am doing this and it is a nothingness, but we're doing it together. So I think that's this passage from the Tao Te Ching is I think a really important teaching tool for people, because it almost outlines the either or not, and the both and yes. And it's a whole glimpse of the wholeness piece in this passage.
Right. And, the irony, what was coming to my mind as you were saying all of that was the traditional image from Aikido, where the man is running across a plain and a bear is chasing him, and he sees a cliff in front of him, but he looks down and sees that there's a branch sticking out halfway down that he can catch on to if he jumps over the cliff, and the bear won't be able to get him. So he jumps over the cliff and grabs the branch, and it's gradually pulling out of the cliff, and he looks down and there's a tiger underneath him. And he then looks over and sees that there's a strawberry on this branch, and it's a reminder that he can reach out and eat the strawberry and get the most out of life that he can get. And the strawberry has the privilege of having lived its life to become a human being, and then very shortly it's going to become a tiger. Right.
Well, yes,
but that's wholeness, is wholeness of putting together your life in such a way that you suck all the juice out of it that you can.
Yes, and I
mindfully.
And there's this. I think that's very directly appropriate. And I think there's also a beautiful wholeness footnote to that, is that if you understand dietary habits of predators, the tiger doesn't give a rat's about strawberries, but the bear loves strawberries. So if you're quick enough, you can toss the strawberry just up after you look up your trail and climb back up. And what are you going to lose? The bear gets the strawberry. If you make it, you run and you may get away. Or if you don't, then you fall. And the tiger gets the privilege of becoming a human being. It's like
that's right. There you
or
go.
you get the privilege of becoming a tiger. I mean,
right. So paragraph 921. Wilhelm describes it as a borderline conception lying at the extreme edge of the world of appearances. In it, the opposites cancel out in non-discrimination, but are still potentially present. These seeds, he continues, point to something that corresponds, firstly, to the visible, i.e., something in the nature of an image. Secondly, to the audible, i.e., something in the nature of words. Thirdly, to extension in space, i.e., something with a form. But these three things are not clearly distinguished and definable. They are a non-spatial, non-temporal unity, having no above and below or front or back. As the Tao Te Ching says, incommensurable, impalpable, yet latent in it are forms. Impalpable, incommensurable, yet within it are entities. Shadowy it is and dim. And that's from chapter 21 of the Tao Te Ching. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that you often use the acorn, that's the oak tree and the acorn, the whole tree and the acorn, that the oak tree is incommensurable, it's impalpable, but its form is latent within the acorn.
Yeah, there's my teaching experience in the last 3 months has really opened my eyes to a lot of things. And last week when I had this 5th grade for one day, at the end of it, for some reason, which I can't put my finger on, one of the kids said to me, "What am I going to be when I grow up?" And I forget what I said. I said something like, "You're going to be a college professor." And then as they were going out the door, about 10 of them wouldn't leave until I had predicted what they would be, right? And the point is that's actually a great thing. I'm gonna start using that, because that helps predict. It helps kids start to imagine their future, and it's like the flipping the quarter. Maybe it will be that way and maybe it won't, but it's activating in the kid a result such that they can then say either yay or nay. And either Mr. Conover was right on, he bang on predicted it, or he was totally wrong and I knew it from the start, right?
Yeah, because you might give them something they really find to be an impetus to find their own drive, right. Or you gave them a rock in a river that they just raft around, and either way that's a good thing because it brought them into a different consciousness. And right. I think too, the acorn and the oak tree and the acorn is one example, but I think a better example of what you're activating in them is that idea that nothing about the caterpillar tells it anything about the butterfly. Yet one day it climbs up that branch or to that, eave, and it makes its chrysalis. And it completely liquefies within that. It doesn't go on a diet and lose some legs and grow some wings. It literally liquefies into a primordial soup and reconstitutes as the butterfly.
Yep.
And the struggle, if you help a butterfly out of its chrysalis, it will never fly. It will be this, dumpy little wings crawling around with this kind of dumpy little body. because what happens is the struggle of backing up to push through the crack in the chrysalis actually pushes all the liquid into the wings,
Mhm.
which then hardens. So you go from that Uranus kind of individuation growth principle to the structure of the wings. And that you're actually birthing, in a sense, the ability for them to discover in themselves those things which they in no way can know at all, but certainly are one of their deepest knowings. And I mean, that's important, the caterpillar to the butterfly, because I think nothing about the caterpillar, it could stare at the sky all at once. It will never learn that it can fly, or
Mhm.
that it will soon.
Right.
And so
Right.
that's a great gift you can give them.
Absolutely.
Because then instead of staring into the black mirror, they'll stare into the blackness of the unconscious and go, oh, what does this tell me? Instead of, quick on the phone.
It's amazing. One little girl who's very small, in the class that I had, I've been having a social studies class for 3 days, and I have it again tomorrow. And so I'm having the same kids 4 days in a row. And
Cool.
right. And so there's this one little girl, and I look at her and I say, "You're going to be a Yenta, that's for sure."
Well,
And I know I'm right, but it's one thing is clear about this girl, that she's going to be a Yenta. Okay.
well, and for those that don't know, what kind of yenta and what's a yenta?
Yeah, and so then they have to go find out.
Right. That's the thing. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, because you're dropping some food coloring in the water, and until they go study, they're not going to be able to clear the water out or amplify the color.
Right. Okay, I'm going to take a brief bio break. So would you carry on until I come back? Yeah, thanks.
Paragraph 922. Reality, thinks Wilhelm, is conceptually knowable because, according to the Chinese view, there is in all things a latent, in quotes, rationality. This is the basic idea underlying meaningful coincidence. It is possible because both sides have the same meaning. Where meaning prevails, order results. Quote from the Tao Te Ching. Tao is eternal, or Tao is eternal, but has no name. The uncarved block, though seemingly of small account, is greater than anything under heaven. If the kings and barons would but possess themselves of it, the 10,000 creatures would flock to do them homage, or homage. Heaven and earth would conspire to send sweet dew. Without law or compulsion, people or men would dwell in harmony. And I think what's interesting there about the uncarved block, though seemingly of small account, is greater than anything under heaven, because the uncarved block is a catalyst. It's a symbol of infinite potential. The uncarved block has no end, and no end until someone makes something of it that's different, or leaves it as an uncarved block for what it is. And that, I think, is that important catalyst to the idea of potential, and the potential in each of us, that we are that uncarved block in places of our passion, in places of our love, in places of our discipline, to make our own order our own way, and take the uncarved block and give it shape that's particularly ours. And so I think without law or compulsion, people would dwell in harmony, or to quote it, men would dwell in harmony. Well, without law or compulsion, what happens is there are no rules, but there's also no drive. And so the harmony is trickster there. It is harmony, but it also is a bit on the boring side, because it's not taken into account that disharmony is like a storm. It's going to shake things up, wash things off. And that is important for continual renewal, to see past the expectations and see that there's always the potential from that notion of the uncarved block. And then he continues from the Tao Te Ching, Tao never does, yet through it all things are done. Heaven's net is wide, coarse are the meshes, yet nothing slips through. And simply put, Skip, I made the connection there of the uncarved block in that second line is greater than anything under heaven, because the uncarved block is like a symbol. It has infinite potential until you interact with it, or leave it as the uncarved block as your symbol, to always know that you can see past the expectation of what the block has been carved to and realize the origin, that you can still carve it any way you want or not.
Surely. And I love the image of the statue of David, which appears is one of Michelangelo's masterworks that appears in Florence. And that block that that statue was carved from sat next to the cathedral for 54 years. And several artists started to work on it, and then they gave up because they could not see David in it. And then Michelangelo, who proved his mastery of his art form by then, simply carved the statue of David out of that block. Now, David was always in there. He was always in there from the beginning.
Yeah, he was the oak tree in the acorn of the block.
Right. He was in there even before the block was quarried out. And but it was only Michelangelo that could see it and see him.
Yeah, and I think that block was, I may not be correct here, maybe just a presumption, but the block was carved out as an example of pure nature. This perfect block, without fissure, without crack, without imperfection. It was nature itself in wholeness in the block. And what happens to me is when you pull that kind of raw power out of nature, and it's still nature, it's going to take a while for the people in society to acclimate to the fact that no, this is beyond difficult. You have to have the ability to work the difficult and the finesse to understand that you are yourself nature. And Michelangelo comes up, and he's pretty much a force of nature rather than being a person. And I would say that because of his artistic ability, he was highly individuated. I would say, and I think as Colleen Keebert said, most architects have this ability to become more balanced because they're working both with the abstract and the concrete at the same time. And they often don't, even though they work with one or the other, they're not necessarily separating them. And so when he, after 54 years, comes up to that uncarved or attempted to be carved block, he's capital in nature himself on his scale, coming up to the middle scale of this block as a representative DNA of the large scale nature itself. And what he brought out of it was, to me, it's in a sense, it's like Schwaller de Lubish's work on the Temple of Luxor. He brought out the perfect man in a way. And not so much in, the cover of GQ or Vogue, but yes, both, because he has this supple sinew. The strength is strong enough to be gentle, fierce enough to be compassionate. It's one of those, you stand in awe rather than offense or defense with that thing. And it connects you. There's a certain, I think it's funny when I know there's a je ne sais quoi, I know there's something I don't know, and I'm not falling off of it. I'm magnetized to it. And that's not offense or defense either, or that's the wholeness presenting again.
Yep. And well, I see the same sort of thing in many pieces, but I love a photograph that I once saw about this about the David. It now is in its own gallery, of course, in Florence, and there's a photograph of 4 nuns that are standing in front of David, and one of them is pointing up at the statue, and the caption says, I don't know what it is, but I know what I like.
Well, it's funny that I saw another cartoon that I think riffed off of that one. It probably used that one as its research, so to speak. And it was those 4 nuns looking up, and Mother Superior is pointing, going, Sister Lupe, stop that navel gazing. And she says, oh, Mother Superior, that's not what I'm doing.
Right. Okay. Moving on.
Right back.
I did find a gouge for how to get students to do their work in class this week, though. It actually was a piece of brilliance on my part. It came purely from my unconscious, because I've been trying to figure out outside of art class how I could introduce the doodle, which is Colleen Kibert's method to get you to experience your own unconscious. And this is a 6th grade class, and I asked them the question, have you ever gotten in trouble for doodling in class? And most students raise their hand to that question. And we have to rethink this entirely, because here's what happened. I've been doodling my my name on the board, and so I said, well, if you bring up your classwork, and mind you, for the whole 3 months that I've been substitute teaching, or 10 weeks or so that I've been substitute teaching, I've been having difficulty having people do their work. Okay. In other words, the teacher would give an assignment, and then I'd have to stand over the kids and say, do it now. You've got to do it. You have 5 minutes, blah, blah, blah. And all these kids are saying to themselves, yeah, I'll just make an excuse to the teacher. That the sub wasn't any good or something like that. But this week, what I said was, if you complete your work and bring it up and show it to me, and I'm satisfied that you've done your work, then I'll let you come up to the whiteboard and doodle around my name. And oh my God, it was like I was overwhelmed, and I happen to have some results from that, so I'll just share them with share one. I'm gonna
Bill real quick.
Okay. All right. So I will share some examples of this. Let's see. Here's a good one. Okay. So here's one example of the doodles that kids did. Now you can see my name, and they've embellished my name, and put all kinds of things on that embellishment, and so they really enjoyed that part of the class. And so, my gosh, I have a new incentive, because what I find out in these elementary school classes is that the teachers have been giving out lifesavers as an incentive. Okay.
Oh, well, that's great, except for the next teacher, it gets them when the sugar spike drops.
Right. Well, there's that, and there's also the idea that candy is an incentive, and so what I find in many of these schools now, which I didn't find so much in my youth, is that um, about 95% of the teachers are women. There are almost no men, and about half the men that appear are all gay, and so there are very few heterosexual men that I'm finding in the school system, surprisingly, and the women that are there are, many of them are hugely obese, hugely, and but they think that candy is an incentive, which obviously one of them has this rolling cart thing with these big deep drawers. Each drawer is about yay deep and this size, and it's got 4 drawers in it. Every one of those drawers was filled with a different kind of candy. Unbelievable.
Well, it's interesting there with the candy because not to go into the other parts, but the candy piece is then their incentive is a pre-soothing device so that you won't feel the work. So you are anesthetized by the sugar to be able to, in a sense, transcend the work. Except what you're doing with the doodle is you're getting them to pay the cover charge of the required work to get into the concert hall of that whiteboard and see their own concert, participating in concert with their own community.
Right.
And the sugar piece is it's anesthesia. And what the thing is, it's quick fixes have shallow roots. It's
Right.
Colleen's, there's no rootless flower. Here, I'll give you the flower, but you don't have to do the work to grow it from the roots.
Yeah,
and
which
you're getting
is
them.
yeah,
It's important.
my criticism of American soccer, which is everybody gets a trophy.
Well,
Everybody
it's like,
does, as the American men found out yesterday, everybody doesn't get a trophy in the World
exactly.
Cup.
And
Right.
and with that whole philosophy, I remember someone saying, "Well, where's my trophy?" They said, "You didn't show up." I said, "Oh," they said, "Well, I made a decision, so I should get a trophy for not showing up." I
Yeah.
mean, and it was a philosophy student, so I mean, she was pushing the buttons, but it was a good point to the, well, I should go get a trophy from everyone because I decided not to be there. And the participation piece, well, no, you need a counterpoint. I'm the non-participation piece. Give me my trophy. And
Right.
that whole easy, let's build the confidence by always telling them they're correct. And then they go into their first day doing whatever after school or into the workforce or into their own business. And well, they don't wonder why no one wants to pay them for doing nothing.
Right. And they've created whole student bodies now where they allow lying and they allow blaming. Okay.
And
They
blaming
allow,
is like sugar. Yeah.
yeah, they allow blaming. I'm going to get off the hook on trouble here because I'm going to blame somebody else. And
Right.
and
Well, blaming is that sugar of the psyche. I can immediately transcend responsibility by blaming someone else.
Yep.
So I can immediately take this sugar and I won't feel the pain of discipline.
Right.
I mean,
right.
So
And
you have to,
the problem with that, as our former president is about to learn, is that you can add on to that sugar candy mountain for your whole lifetime, and at the end you get to the end of your life and something really bad can happen to you.
well, yeah, and it's not an eternal gobstopper. It's just lots of candy. There's nothing magical. I mean, if I took the one eternal gobstopper from Willy Wonka,
Mhm.
okay, that's fine, but it's just one tool. it's not a consistent poisonous sugar drip over time to keep me, at bay from actually feeling the forces in my life that are present.
Yeah. Okay, so we're up to 923, are we?
Yes, we are.
Okay, 923. Chuang Tzu, a contemporary of Plato's, says of the psychological premise on which Tao is based, the state in which ego and non-ego are no longer opposed is called the pivot of the Tao. Okay, so there's no more opposition. It sounds almost like a criticism of our scientific view of the world when he remarks that Tao is obscured when you fix your eye on little segments of existence only, or limitations are not originally grounded in the meaning of life. Originally, words had no fixed meanings. Differences only arose through looking at things subjectively. The sages of old, says Chuang Tzu, took as their starting point a state when the existence of things had not yet begun. That is indeed the extreme limit beyond which you cannot go. The next assumption was that though things existed, they had not yet begun to be separated. The next, that though things were separated in a sense, affirmation and negation had not yet begun. When the affirmation and negation came into being, Tao faded. After Tao faded, then came one-sided attachments. Outward hearing should not penetrate further than the ear. The intellect should not seek to lead a separate existence. Thus, the soul can become empty and absorb the whole world. It is Tao that fills this emptiness. If you have insight, says Chuang Tzu, you use your inner ear, your inner eye, your inner ear to pierce the heart of things and have no need of intellectual knowledge. This is obviously an allusion to the absolute knowledge of the unconscious and to the presence in the microcosm of macrocosmic events. Okay.
There are 2 points I have on this paragraph specifically. The state in which ego and non-ego are no longer opposed is called the pivot of Tao. And what's beautiful there is if they're no longer opposed, there need not be a pivot, except there's a pivot. So there's the nothingness concept kind of hovering around in between in there. And it reminds me of, teaching people about how to start, how to begin action. And, there's the pro-con, pros and cons piece where you make a list of the pros and you make a list of the cons. And I would have them give me 10 pros and 10 cons. Now, pick the 3 most prominent cons, circle those, cross out the rest, and now put 10 more pros. Because you have then more than 6 times of the heart of the matter in the pros, but you will judge your acceptable risk as to whether you proceed based on the 3 cons, because the pro-con game, if both are equal, is the con game. You can learn, if you look at the cons, you could live the rest of your life finding the cons of anything, and you will never do anything. And so I always found that then people will go, oh, well, this con's a deal killer. So that's that. I said, okay, turn the page. Let's look at another scenario. Make your 10 pros, 10 cons, cross out all of them except for 3 cons and add 10 more pros. And then on the third example, I would say, okay, make your 10 pros and make your 10 cons. Now, cross out the 7 cons you don't want. Don't circle the 3 cons you want. I want you to see through that rabble of all your crossouts to try to discern anything bad out in those stormy clouds of the cons. Now, what's the 1 pro? That's the pro of the pros. And they're like, well, but now there's only 1 pro and there are 3 cons. I'm like, yeah, but you can't see the cons very well. So look at the pro more intensely. And, it's the kind of thing where then it pushed people into then this last part of, outward hearing should not penetrate further than the ear. And that to me clearly says, don't take other people's stuff on. Leave it on the table. Listen deeply. But only thing you do is pick out the gold nuggets that resonate. Wash the rest back off into the river. It's just alluvium. And then the alluvium is pretty much the big list of cons.
Mm-hmm.
The cons are going to be, they're not going to leave once you start.
Yeah.
They are the rocks in the river. And then you have to understand how intense is the flow of the river. So how much in advance do you need to prepare to be on one side or the other to avoid that rock or the waterfall or whatever? And so I think this paragraph is pretty important in regards to how
absolutely.
to, incite action in yourself.
Right. No,
And then
I like
people
that.
for the pro-con game.
I like your exercise. That's a good exercise.
Thanks, because it gets people into it. And then immediately with the first thing shows them my disbelief of it.
Mm-hmm.
But then they're skeptical. So in the second one, though, I change it. But in the third one, it's like, you're going to have to pick a side. It's like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead with 924, if you will.
All right. This Taoistic view is typical of Chinese thinking. It is, whenever possible, a thinking in terms of the whole. A point also brought out by Marcel Grenet. And he has that in The Mind of East Asia, which gives an excellent account of the synchronistic mentality of the Chinese. The eminent Marcel Grenet, the eminent authority on Chinese psychology, this peculiarity can be seen in ordinary conversation with the Chinese. What seems to us a perfectly straightforward, precise question about some detail evokes from the Chinese thinker an unexpectedly elaborate answer, as though one had asked them for a blade of grass and got a whole meadow in return. With us, details are important for their own sakes. For the Oriental mind, they always complete a total picture. In this totality, as in primitive or in our own medieval pre-scientific psychology, still very much alive, he puts in parentheses, are included things which seem to be connected with one another only by chance, by a coincidence whose meaningfulness appears altogether arbitrary. This is where the theory of the correspondentia comes in, which was propounded by the natural philosophers of the Middle Ages, and particularly the classical idea of the sympathy of all things, where Hippocrates says, and the footnote is, correspondence from Niels Bohr was used as a mediating term between the representation of the discontinuum particle and the continuum wave, originally 1913 to 18. He called it the principle of correspondence, but later, 1927, it was formulated as the argument of correspondence. So particularly the classical idea of sympathy of all things, Hippocrates says, there is one common flow, one common breathing. All things are in sympathy. The whole organism and each one of its parts are working in conjunction for the same purpose. The great principle extends to the extremist part, and from the extremist part, it returns to the great principle, to the one nature, being and not being. The universal principle is found even in the smallest particle, which therefore corresponds to the whole. In paragraph 925, in this connection, there is an interesting idea in Philo from 25 BC to AD 42. He didn't live very long. 17 years?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, we have prodigy. So,
and Philo is Philo the Jew, and he wrote a
Yeah.
lot of stuff in that 17 years. My God.
so I think he
Right.
was born with a pen in his hand,
He had to have been, yep.
or a dictation machine. It's like, so he says, God, being minded to unite in intimate and loving fellowship, the beginning and end of created things, made heaven the beginning and man the end. The one, the most perfect of imperishable objects of sense, the other, the noblest of things earthborn and perishable, being, in very truth, a miniature heaven. He bears about within themselves, like holy images, endowments of nature that correspond to the constellations. For since the corruptible and the incorruptible are by nature contrary the one to the other, God assigned the fairest of each sort to the beginning and the end, heaven, as I have said, to the beginning, and man to the end. Here the great principle, or beginning, heaven, is infused into man, the microcosm, who reflects the star-like natures, and thus, as the smallest part, an end of the work of creation contains the whole. So that posits man as DNA, the universe. And what's interesting is our DNA with a double helix, if you look at our solar system, except instead of looking at it statically in motion, just standalone, put it in its motion around the galactic center. There's a 270 million year orbit.
Yeah.
Not a transit I typically use in any kind of astrology sessions. But of the sun around the galactic center. So if you put the streamers of motion like comet tails on the sun and all the planets, and you start to move them in orbit around the galactic center, what's interesting is, fast moving Mercury and Venus, and then the Earth, and then Mars, and then the slower, all this stuff happening, all of those comet trails of the planetary motions through space attributed or added to create a solar system size DNA double helix strand.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a principle in life at a scale of the planets and the solar system that doesn't have lungs or hearts or livers or spleens or arms, legs, fingers, toes, et cetera, except its nature is conceptually, structurally identical to our own DNA. And so it's interesting how different things form from the same concept. And that puts life forward as a generative symbol. And what product comes out of it is only basically constrained by the nature of its context or its creator. So if I'm making a building, or if I'm making a piece of artwork, or writing a poem, or drafting an invoice, the only person who's gonna make that anything is me. But at the end, someone else, and I say draft an invoice, and they're like, well, no, I'm not self-employed. So the thing is, that's a product that do nothing from that statement. But it's the same, it uses the DNA, except they don't need that kind. They need a different kind.
Righto. Okay, moving on. It's amazing to me as I was looking ahead to this part, that this Theophrastus lived 82 years or 83 years,
Yeah,
which is the same length of life as my father lived. He died in 2006, but Friday was his 100th birthday, this past Friday. And so anyway, even though Philo died after 17 years, oh no, wait a minute. No, Philo, Philo lived 25 plus 42. Okay,
yeah,
so it wasn't he lived part of his life in the Christian era. So it was 25 plus 42. He lived to be 67, not 17.
How about me missing the BC to AD part? I just went 25. So here's the thing. We just came off the chapter with all the formulas and numbers, and look how quickly I jumped. There's a lesson there.
Yeah.
Read the material.
Right.
I mean, pick the one that most doesn't fit, and you pick the one that fits and you get it wrong. So
yeah. Right. Okay, reading on. According to Theophrastus, 371 to 288 BC,
Theophrastus. Theophrastus?
Theophrastus. Well, tomato. The suprasensuous and the sensuous are joined by a bond of community. This bond cannot be mathematics, so must presumably be God. Similarly, in Plotinus, the individual souls born of the one world soul are related to one another by sympathy and antipathy, regardless of distance. Similar views are to be found in Pico della Mirandola, who said, firstly, there is the unity in things whereby each thing is at one with itself, consists of itself, and coheres with itself. Secondly, there is unity whereby one creature is united with the others and all parts of the world constitute one world. The third and most important unity is that whereby the whole universe is one with its creator, as an army with its commander. And that gives a long, well,
Yeah, it's all in
Latin. Wonderful.
Latin, which is basically restating what he just said.
Right.
I mean, the unum sibique right there, you can see the unity of the, so,
Right.
and tertiary aquae omnium would be, that which is ancillary to the primary.
Right. So I'm not going to read that because although I did take Latin 1 twice, I took it in the 8th grade, which was an advanced class. But when I got a D in it, my teacher told me, I'll pass you with a D, the lowest possible D of 68, provided you agree to take it again next year in 9th grade,
Yeah.
which I did. And then
I would say my Latin is worse because I taught myself, which means I pretty much have a big compendium of nouns and verbs, and the twain sometimes don't. So it's the literal translator, which loses the whole essence of the language. So I can get a general concept, but I'm not getting the nuances.
Yeah. Okay. So reading on, by this threefold unity, Pico. Pico means a simple unity, which, like the Trinity, has 3 aspects. A unity. Wow, my voice is just going. A unity distinguished by a threefold character, yet in such a way as not to depart from the simplicity of unity. For him, the world is one being, a visible God, in which everything.
Let me finish out the paragraph.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Visible God, in which everything is naturally arranged from the very beginning, like the parts of a living organism. The world appears as the corpus mysticum of God, just as the church is the corpus mysticum of Christ, or as a well-disciplined army can be called a sword in the hand of the commander. The view that all things are arranged according to God's will is one that leaves little room for causality. Just as in a living body, the different parts work in harmony and are meaningfully adjusted to one another. So events in the world stand in a meaningful relationship which cannot be derived from any immanent causality. The reason for this is that in either case, the behavior of the parts depends on a central control which is supraordinate to them.
Right. So, and supraordinate, it's quite important to distinguish between super and supra. Supraordinate means that it is within them always. Right.
Right. Which is the opposite of transcendent or super, being outside. And it can be, you can transcend supraordinately, that's, so far infinitesimally within, or you can transcend superordinately, which is infinity out in the universe outside.
Okay.
928.
Yeah.
Do you have any comments on the by the threefold unity of Pico, or
No, I don't. And I'm gonna take another break here so that I can get a cough medicine for my throat. So I'll be right back.
Okay,
See if
sounds
that
good.
works.
Cool. Paragraph 928. In his treatise, De Hominis Dignitat, Dignitat, Pico says, the Father implanted in man at birth seeds of all life and the germs of original life. Just as God is the copula of the world, so within the created world is man. Let us make man in our image, who is not a fourth world or anything like a new nature, but is rather the fusion and synthesis of three worlds, the supra-celestial, meaning celestial within, the celestial, and the sublunary. In body and spirit, man is the little god of the world, the microcosm. Like God, therefore, man is a center of events, and all things revolve about him. This thought, so utterly strange to the modern mind, dominated man's picture of the world until a few generations ago, when natural science proves man's subordination to nature and his extreme dependence on causes. The idea of a correlation between events and meaning, now assigned exclusively to man, was banished to such a remote and benighted region that the intellect lost track of it altogether. Schopenhauer remembered it somewhat belatedly after it had formed one of the chief items in Leibniz's scientific explanations. Paragraph 929. By virtue of his microcosmic nature, man is a son of the firmament or macrocosm. In quotes, I am a star traveling together with you. End quotes. The initiate confesses in the Mithraic liturgy. In alchemy, the microcosmos has the same significance as the rotundum, a favorite symbol since the time of Zosimos of Annapolis, which was also known as the monad. Paragraph 930. The idea that the inner and outer man together form the whole of Hippocrates, a microcosm or smallest part wherein the great principle is undividedly present, also characterizes the thought of Agrippa von Nettesheim. He says, the ancients had said, all things are full of gods. These gods were divine powers which are diffused in things. Zoroaster called them divine allurements, and Synesius symbolic enticements. This latter interpretation comes very close indeed to the idea of archetypal projections in modern psychology, although from the time of Synesius until quite recently, there was no epistemological criticism, let alone the newest form of it, namely psychological criticism. Agrippa shares with the Platonists the view that there is in the lower beings a certain virtue through which they agree in large measure with the higher, and that as a result, the animals are connected with the divine bodies, in essence, the stars, and exert an influence on them. Here he quotes Virgil. I, for my part, do not believe that they, the rooks, cornerstones of chess, are endowed with the divine spirit or with a foreknowledge of things greater than the oracle. Agrippa is paragraph 931. Agrippa is thus suggesting that there is an inborn knowledge or perception in living organisms, an idea which recurs in our own day and Hans Streich. Whether we like it or not, we find ourselves in this embarrassing position as soon as we begin seriously to reflect on the teleological processes in biology or to investigate the compensatory function of the unconscious, not to speak of trying to explain the phenomenon of synchronicity. Final causes, twist them how we will, postulate a foreknowledge of some kind. It is certainly not a knowledge that could be connected with the ego, and hence not a conscious knowledge as we know it, but rather a self-subsistent, unconscious knowledge, which I would prefer to call absolute knowledge. It is not cognition, but as Leibniz so excellently calls it, a perceiving, which consists, or to be more cautious, seems to consist of images of subjectless simulacra or simulacra. These postulated images are presumably the same as my archetypes, which can be shown to be formal factors in spontaneous fantasy products. Expressed in modern language, the microcosm, which contains, in quotes, the images of all creation, would be the collective unconscious. By the spiritus mundi, the ligamentum animae e corporis, and quinta essentia, which he shares with the alchemists, Agrippa probably means what we would call the unconscious, the spirit that penetrates all things or shapes all things, is the world's soul. And he quotes, the soul of the world, therefore, is a certain only thing, filling all things, bestowing all things, binding and knitting together all things, that it might make one frame of the world. Those things in which this spirit is particularly powerful have a tendency to beget their like. In other words, to produce correspondences or meaningful coincidences. Agrippa gives a long list of these correspondences based on the numbers 1 to 12. A similar but more alchemical table of correspondences can be found in a treatise of Aegidius de Vadis. Of these, I would only mention the Scala Unitatis, because it is especially interesting from the point of view of the history of symbols. Yod, the first letter of the Tetragrammaton, the divine name, Anima Mundi, Sol, Lapis Philosophorum, Cor, Lucifer. I must content myself with saying that this is an attempt to set up a hierarchy of archetypes, and that tendencies in this direction can be shown to exist in the unconscious. So I find that interesting there, that then he's then taken the unconscious, and we have the archetypes, but then he's fallen prey to, oh, well, we need to create a hierarchy. We need to attribute order. And I think, yes, it's a good exercise, but back to pros and cons, I'd say leave them the heck alone. And
yeah, they already have order.
Yeah, they have order. And I think it's living the order rather than explaining the order, because they will pop up differently at different times. You know, one's primary. People. Right. Yeah, and then the status quo of your own status quo. You're running down this straight road, basically, except all of a sudden out of nowhere, the road turns. And if you're just going along with, oh, well, this is my primary archetype, you're going to run right off the road. And you're going to wonder why everything went all the heck. And the thing is, because you didn't navigate. You got a whole new archetypal unconscious GPS beat, turn left in 50 feet, it's like, it's, well, when I'm going 90, turn left at 50 feet, it already happened and I missed it. So, so I think that's important there, where his notion of attributing order to the archetypes, where then, like you said, they already have an order. So rather than attributing, I think it should be discerning. And in that same time, and at that same time, discern the fluidity with which they shift focus, redirect scale, and move the protagonist, exude stay left, and the new one comes in.
What did you have as opposite the discerning?
His explanation.
So instead of attributing
order, I think it's discerning and living the order, but discerning the order, I think, makes for a nuanced distinction of how to operate with the fluid nature of the unconscious, where reasons are unreasonable. And it doesn't matter why a new archetype is present. It's like a quark or an idea. I don't need to know where the quark came from out of nothingness, but it just suddenly appeared. I don't need to know that my ideas come from my imagination or from the unconscious or from where somewhere they come else. From. Yeah. I don't need to know that. Because the intuition, to me, the psychological function is reasons are unreasonable. Once
Yeah.
it's present, it is. The question
Right.
is, do I discern to deal with it, or do I discern to treat it as alluvium and let it
Mhm.
pass by? But then when I get to the function of feeling, what do I feel about that intuition? That will help me. What do I think about how I feel about that intuition? And then sensation, what do I do about what with my thinking about the feeling of the intuition? And I think that makes the 4-cylinder psyche, pretty turbocharged by all of them working together to
Right.
discern rather than attribute. Because
Right.
attribution to me is an external, you have a front row seat, but you're not on the field. Discerning is you're in the mix. From my perspective, I think it's just
Yeah.
a nuanced way I flip the word from attribute or explain to discern.
Yeah. So Miles has said, I just learned that the language spoken in Moldova is basically Latin. The scientific spirit, a zealous search for the truth with a ruthless disregard for commonly bled beliefs when contradicted by observation. M.E. Hellman, computer engineer. Scientific spirit seems a phrase of wholeness of 4 functions. And then he said, held, not bled, spell check. Okay, I don't know I don't quite know what you're saying here, Miles, but it must be good, whatever it is.
Well, I think that's that's an interesting comment, Miles. I mean, because I don't think science has the 4 functions simply because it often ignores an intuition and looks for a projection of the result desired from to discern the parts that you start with. I mean, scientists going from the not knowing. I mean, it's when people say trust the science. Well, that's an antithesis statement to science. No, you don't trust the science. You repeat the science to see if the science works, but you don't just trust it because this one thing happened. Because then, well, what were the contextual features? What's the double blind? What was included? And more specifically, what was accepted? What was left out? And I think those pieces, you can do lots of things in a vacuum. And then what happens? Your rocket blows up 3 times, because, well, when it's out here, oh, we had bad weather, we didn't account for. Well, why not? You just wasted $40 million on, these rockets. Well, we can't account for weather in the lab. So the real-time testing to me of the psyche is the 4-fold functions. But the scientific method to me, though the 4 functions probably are present within it, I think there's an artificially attributed origin to any experiment.
Yeah, and you could as easily say the 400 functions. Okay,
yes.
Simply by taking the 4 functions and dividing them up by many other things, which would be fairly straightforward, or 4,000 assumptions, right? And so you're always better trying to see the whole, it seems to me.
Mm-hmm. Also, with your idea of the 400 functions or 4,000 functions,
yeah,
did that scientist skip the day when they talked about the importance of the decimal point? So when they see 4, well, zeros have no value. 4 million is the same as 4 is the same as 400,000 is the same as 4,000, because it's just 4 plus a lot of zeros. Except when to the left of the decimal point, if they don't know that, I mean, literally, sometimes you'll read a study and go, well, your hypothesis is flawed.
Yeah.
I mean, and the thing is, hypothesis actually can't be flawed because it's just a question, basically. But when they start out with, you see the non-answer of their avoidance and their exceptions in the hypothesis.
Right.
You're like, well, why do that?
Today, or this week, I found myself teaching a 5th grade class the significance of factors of 10. And what was very interesting about that class, and I haven't thought about this probably since I was in the 5th grade, is that you don't have to do any math to deal with the factors of 10. All you have to do is, if you're multiplying, you move the decimal point to the right. And if you're dividing, you move the decimal point to the left. And so if you're multiplying by 1,000, let's say, you move the decimal point to the right 3 places. And if you're dividing by 1,000, you move the decimal point 3 places to the left. And that's all there is to it. It's not math.
Well, no, it's a beautiful.
It's a procedure.
Procedure, because I know when I'm like at a restaurant and I'm, you get the bill and I'm sign. People go, well, how did you calculate the tip so quickly? What did you give? 15. Service wasn't so good. 20. The service was good. Yeah, but how did you do that so quickly? I said, it's so simple. I tipped 20%. I moved the decimal point over and then doubled that number and moved the 0, and that's the tip. I mean, if $20, well, I moved the decimal point over. 10% is 2 times 2 is 4. Boom. If I want 15%, I move it over once and say, oh, 10% is 2. And then instead of times 2, divide by 2 is 5. So 2 plus 1 or 2 plus 1 is 3. There's the tip, 15%. If you want 17%, move it over to 10. Say, okay, 10% of $20 is $2. Well, and then I want 17%. So then I move it over again and say, well, 10% of $2 is 20 cents, and multiply that by 7. And 20 cents times 7 is $1.40. So a total is $2.40. And the thing is, too, numbers, and this is what the other trick besides tips, which I think is really cool, is percentages are reciprocally reflexive. If I want 2% of 8 or 8% of 2, well, 8% of 2, wow, that's a hassle. But 2% of 8 is the same as 8% of 2. So 2% of 8, well, you actually make it easier. 10% of 8 is 0.8. 8% of 2, 0.8. So, I mean, you could, if you see a number and you're like, God, those are just weird. I don't know that multiplication division table. Just switch them and it's the same. I mean, 20% of 25 is 5. But if I say 5% of 25, you're like, what?
Yeah, well, one of the things that drives me crazy on Talking Heads current affairs is that they're often talking about a division problem, but they put it in terms of a multiplication problem,
right?
Like they
multiplying by a decimal, right?
Yeah, so they say instead of saying 1/4, they say 4 times less or something like that.
Yeah, 4 times less.
And I don't know, maybe that's new math.
Well, here's something about perception. Burger King, I think 20 years ago, made a 1/3-pound burger at the same price as McDonald's 1/4 pounder. But when people saw 1/3, they thought, because the 3 was less than 4, they thought that 1/3 was less than 1/4. And 1/3, and they lost their rumpuses on it, because people thought the 1/3 was less than 1/4, because they weren't as familiar with the 1/3 as the 1/4. But most people saw the 3 and went, oh, that's less than 4, so 1/3 must be less than 1/4. And it's totally an error. But so you're dealing with, how well do people make decisions based on the facts? Well, if the facts are unfamiliar, 1/3, they don't know what a fraction is. So they're like, well, the 1's the 1, they cancel out, and the 3 is less than 4, so 1/3 must be less than 1/4. And it's not the case. And so anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do one more paragraph, because then Jung is getting into alchemy, and we'll talk about that next week.
Okay.
So we're still talking about. My voice is somewhat better, so I'll try to read it, and if I can't, we'll do something else. I'll ask you to read. Okay, so I'm on paragraph 932. Agrippa
Yes.
was an old contemporary of Theophrastus Paracelsus and is known to have had a considerable influence on him. So it is not surprising if the thinking of Paracelsus proves to be steeped in the idea of correspondence. He says, quote, "If a man will be a philosopher without going astray, he must lay the foundations of his philosophy by making heaven and earth a microcosm and not be wrong by a hair's breadth. Therefore, he who will lay the foundations of medicine must also guard against the slightest error and must make from the microcosm the revolution of heaven and earth, so that the philosophy does not find anything in heaven and earth that he does not also find in man, and the physician does not find anything in man which heaven and earth do not have. And these two differ only in outward form, and yet the form on both sides is understood as pertaining to one thing. The paragranum is a footnote. It's not a useful footnote. The paragranum has said pointed, the paragranum has some pointed psychological remarks to make about physicians. Quote, "For this reason, we assume not four, but one arcanum, which is, however, four square, like a tower facing the four winds. And as little as a tower may lack a corner, so little may the physician lack one of the parts. At the same time, he knows how the world is symbolized by an egg in its shell, and how a chick with all its substance lies hidden within it. Thus, everything in the world and in man must lie hidden in the physician. And just as the hens, by their brooding, transform the world prefigured in the shell into a chick, so alchemy brings to maturity the philosophical arcana lying in the physician. Wherein lies the error of those who do not understand the physician aright." You want to comment on that?
Well, yeah, I think the philosophical arcana, that means the philosophical mystery lying within the physician.
Right.
And then, well, and herein lies the error of those who do not understand the physician aright. Well, who do not understand the not knowing, who do not understand the mystery, the nascent, asleep, latent within,
Right.
the oak tree that has not emerged from the acorn, the butterfly which has not emerged from the process of transformation in the caterpillar, all these pieces of, that wholeness. Well, the wholeness has eyes in the storm. It has a wholeness would have then something. Here's what's interesting: the wholeness could have something around it that's nothingness, and that's just like the space between the notes in music. Or if I say aum, 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 well, then that's the four-character voice of the universe. And people say, but there are only three letters. Well, the fourth character is the silence that exists within, between, and around those three. So there's always the component of nothingness within the wholeness. And I think that, my new primary example that I've come up with is, okay, I have a thought. Well, that means that one neuron fired across the leap of faith, mini void abyss of the synapse. Well, so right there, the nothingness is 50% of my equation of an idea. And then it lands on the other synapse. Well, guess what? It's still a full 1/3. The nothingness is a full 1/3 to the 2/3 of the thingness, the substance. So I find that when people try to over-explain or prove, or that's to me just psychological, you're just talking out loud. I find it rhetorical, and I don't need to respond. And, someone will pose a question, but it's obviously biased towards the answer, one or two. And I'll say, well, the third option, here's what I see. What you're asking is telling me more about your list of you than it is about the things you're asking me to respond to.
Right.
But so I think what happens there is the nothingness is, or the not knowing, or the philosophical mystery, philosophical arcana, living, lying or living within the physician. That nothingness piece is so important. But people say, well, but I can't take that to the bank. And I'm like, yeah, but the space between you and the bank right now is really important. So if you don't have that space between, you're never going to go there. Otherwise, you're already there. And which brings me to, I think the other day, I guess I was in a squirrely mood. So I wasn't really in the mood for playing someone said something about getting closer to God. And I said, ever think about the omnipresence thing? How can I if he's everywhere? I mean, and so it's the kind of, and the thing is, that meant getting closer to divinity by more naturally living it rather than I'm going to go do something. It's not a path of travel with let me pull out MapQuest. How do I get closer? 3.4 miles, turn left. You'll be closer to God. No, it's everywhere. So I think the nothingness piece is important to put into that equation because it's actually part of the divinity. It's part of the wholeness.
Yep.
I mean, if I say both and, I'm actually saying one thing and nothing, and or two things in the space between them, wholeness. So anyway, that's my little soapbox.
Right. Okay. Let's see here. I wanted to repeat about my wisdom path lesson, but I want to make sure that I have said the right thing here.
That next week?
I beg your pardon?
Is that next week?
No, it's in January, on January the 21st. That is finalized. However, let's see. I have to say that I regret I do not have the time correct, or for sure. And so therefore I'm not, but it is going to be on the 21st of January. That I know. And the topic is the schizophrenia complex. I have put in this, I'm going to put it in the chat for the YouTube, the announcement of it, which says 2 p.m. Eastern time on the 21st. I have to recheck that about the time. And so we have time to clarify it. But anyway, save the date and save that midday period, because this is a very profound book. And what I found about it, and I'm now showing it to you, the Schizophrenia Complex by Eva Maram. She's a Jungian analyst in Orange County, California. And what I found about it is that she's talking about the complex that emerges in people who deal with people who have schizophrenia, not schizophrenia per se.
Right.
And that's very profound and something that we all experience one way or another. We also all experience the seeds of schizophrenia ourselves. I mean, the example, schizophrenia is a kind of chaos from which you cannot return. And I gave her an example, which was that in my up to sixth grade in my schooling, I went to 8 different schools. And so for a young child, and I went to 15 by the time I finished graduate school. So, but for a young child, up to grade 6 to be in 8 different schools, that's more than one a year. And it is chaos because you're plucked out of your universe that you've worked out and ordered in your mind. Okay, I know what I'm supposed to do here and how I interact with these people. But then you're plucked out and you're put into another environment. And again, you have no idea who the players are in your universe. And so you have to order it yourself. And the issue in schizophrenia, for that example, would be if someone can't reorder their universe based on being plucked out of this one. And so anyway, I just found this book really profound, very interesting. The idea of the interacting with people with schizophrenia is all around us, whether we know it or not. And so I urge everyone to read this book between now and the 21st of January. And we're going to interview Dr. Maram on that day. She had the experience of her husband, or not her husband, her son becoming schizophrenic. And he later was able to pull himself out of it with the benefit of some pharmaceuticals and so on. But it was quite a scary time for her. And so she really went through this herself and was able to write a book about it. And so I urge everyone to take a look at this book and do check the time again next week, because I have to double check what we said, whether it's 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock Eastern time. But in the West, it'll be in the late morning, either 10 or 11 in the morning. And, I picked those times so that it would also be, I believe it's 8 p.m. European time, which is 2 o'clock Eastern time, and 11 o'clock in the morning Pacific time. That, I think that's what we finally said. But I have to double check that.
Okay.
And
well, with your multiple schools, you were kind of an educational institutional Herodotus. And you just travel.
Right. Well, I have had a lot of experience around the world, and that I think is standing in good stead. And I did get a permanent, or not a permanent, an extended sub job as of tomorrow, which means that for our advanced reading group, we may or may not be changing to 5 p.m. Eastern time, 3 p.m.
Right.
Mountain time. I have to double check that with the other leaders of the advanced group. I think what we said on last Wednesday was they would be receptive to a change to 5 o'clock Eastern time.
Yes.
Because I'm basically the only one in Eastern time.
Yeah.
And so it's just an afternoon class for everyone else. But anyway.
I have one last question.
Yes, sir.
So do I look more whole right now?
Do you look more whole? I need to look at you.
Because I've just completed a whole another year.
Oh, it's your birthday today?
It is.
Omerito gozaimasu. What day is it?
December 4th.
How about that? And so what does that make you? It makes you, let's see, I think you said you were 53 before, so you must be 54 now.
Actually, I was 54, so now I'm 55.
Okay. Well, you haven't reached the short strokes yet.
Well, and I laughed. My mom said, "Oh, there's a box coming, and it's a surprise." So that's it, no questions. And I said, "So a prepaid AARP membership is that?"
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. Old age is not for the faint of heart, I can
There
tell
you go.
you. And
But it's also a privilege denied to many. So
yeah, and for me, taking on a K through 12 teaching assignment and a different one every day in this new role at age 76 is quite challenging. It's exciting, but it's and fun, but it's quite a role.
well, I like how you're turning your knowledge back into them,
Yeah,
because there's a, depending on, how good each of their parents is or isn't. I mean, some of them may be, just, overburdened. So there you go. It doesn't mean they're a bad
sure.
parent.
All parents are overburdened anyway.
Yeah, it's, but I think it's cool that you're, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or, well, someone says, okay, I don't want to grow up. Okay, then what are you right now? Oh,
Yeah.
wait, I'll go for the growing up part, so it gives me some more time.
Yeah, but it was fascinating that in about 1 minute, I predicted what 10 fifth graders would be when they grew up. And, it just sort of happened. It was an event at the end of that class before they went home. And, they may or may not remember it, but and it may or may not be true. But they have to think about it, and that's the interesting thing. I think that it causes people to think, and
does, and I think,
I don't want to do that. Well, fine,
Yeah.
don't do it then.
well, and I'm impressed too, because I think what's cool is, even if it doesn't make a memory, at least right there, they experienced an engagement and aliveness in their moment.
Yeah,
And they probably, I mean, this is, conjecture, presumption, but they probably don't have a lot of that. And
yeah,
I think what's cool about that is, I remember my best, mentors, mentresses. It's not what they taught me. It's what they taught me to teach myself, the learning how to learn. Because then not only did I get curious and have wonderment and get interested in something, you start to get interested in yourself in a way that's not egomaniacal. It's that self-centered, meaning, oh, I have a center. It doesn't, and I think then they can forget themselves and go, well, what do I want to do?
yeah. Well, the one thing I have to be careful of is I can't predict you're going to be a convict or something like that. Even though that's what I actually think in some of these cases.
Like the movie Back to the Future, when Matthew J. Fox goes back and he sees his uncle in the the crib with the wood bars, the little square playpen for kids, and the kid's like this looking through the bars, and he's like, "Oh, Uncle Charlie, you better get used to those bars," because that's what he's going to do, go to prison. So no, I get that. Here's the thing, though. You're giving them a thing that actually might keep them out of that.
Yeah.
They might not fall there, because I don't think it's mental illness that causes crime. I think pretty much it's environment and being pushed around and then such a way that you go against laws, etc. But not because you're faulty. You weren't given the proper substance. I mean, you're in a sense starved, so there's a desperation piece, and you're giving them something that's nourishing, that they can take with them, that doesn't ever need to be consumed. It's something that's actually pretty indelible, and it's the non-narcotic hope. Not
it's just changing a perspective. For example, in all these classes, I say, why are we going to school? Why are you here? And the 99% answer is to learn. Well, that's not why we go to school. Okay, we go to school to learn to be successful adults, and
to learn how to learn
yeah,
in real time, because you're going to come up
right.
against things that aren't that mirror of history, that have nothing to do with what's happened in the past. And then that's when, you just find out your mettle.
Yep. Okay, so thank you, Jordan. I'll see you tomorrow night, I suppose. And in the meantime, have a great Sunday, everyone.
Take care.
We'll see you next week. Bye-bye. We'll be talking about alchemy in this material next week. Yeah. So, bye-bye.